Republicans end up keeping the House and keeping control of it next year. They believe they'll have one issue to thank, and it's health care. They're hoping public anxiety and frustration over the new program replaces anxiety, anger, and frustration over the government shutdown, which drove GOP approval numbers as low as 24%. Earlier this morning, I spoke with Congressman Greg Walden, chairman of the NRCC, the man in charge of keeping the House. Right now, there are 231 Republicans, 200 Democrats, and 4 vacant House seats. That means Republicans have a pretty big margin of error, according to the Cook Political Report. 10 Democratic seats are considered toss-ups, but Democrats also have a chance to pick up seats held by people like Colorado Republican Mike Coffman, California Republican Gary Miller, and the one vacated by the late Florida Congressman Bill Young. So Republicans could lose all of those that I just told you about and still hang on to the majority. And if you toss in the 7 Democratic seats that the NRCC is targeting in districts that Mitt Romney won last year, but Democrats won the congressional seat, then the party's margin for error gets even better. So joining me now is Oregon Republican Congressman Greg Walden. He's the chairman of the NRCC. He's also a member of the Energy and Commerce Committee. Congressman Walden, good morning to you, sir.
Chuck, good to be back with you.
All right, let me ask you the basic question. Do you think the Republican majority in the House is in jeopardy in 2014?
No, I don't. In fact, I think we have an opportunity to grow seats in 2014. Midterm elections are usually a referendum on the president and his party, and this president's got a lot of answering to do, from certainly Obamacare and the economy to NSA and other topics that I think are going to be foremost on Americans' mind when they go to the ballot box in the fall of 2014.
If this were October 2014 and not October 2013, how nervous would you be?
Look, I'm always nervous going into an election, and I usually come out of them pretty strong, but I never take any of them for granted. We got to go do our job. We know we're up against the campaigner-in-chief and Speaker Pelosi, who desperately wants to be back as Speaker. But we're doing our job. We've got terrific recruits, a broad group of men and women from all over the country that really, I think, are going to be a new face for the Republican Party going forward, and they're going to be very effective. 17 of our 20 patriots, you mentioned some of our incumbents that are being challenged, outraise their Democrat counterparts. Yeah. And we've got candidates around the country who are running against Democrats who have outraised their Democrats. And you talk about primaries. You look at Gary Miller's seat. You mentioned Gary. Pete Aguilar, that ran last time, didn't make it on the ballot in California. He came in 3rd in their jungle primary. He now faces a 3-way, very competitive and divisive primary.
Let me ask you about this issue, though, of you're having to defend the House Republican majority. Right now, congressional Republican favorable ratings are at all-time lows, depending on the poll you look at, but a lot of national polls show that. I understand what's going on in individual districts, and that districts look different from the national climate, but there is this issue here. You got to defend the shutdown strategy. What do you tell your members? How do you defend the shutdown strategy?
I think part of it, Chuck, is time will help here. But second, and more importantly, being off the stage and letting you all actually report what's happening with Obamacare is already put the Democrats back on their heels. And the reports out overnight about the fact that the Obama administration actually knew that up to half, maybe as high as 80% of people with individual policies would lose them. At the same time, the president repeatedly said you can keep the policy you have if you like it. Now you've got to ask the question, when did he know it? What did he know? And we're going to ask that question of Secretary Sebelius tomorrow in the Energy and Commerce Committee. And so I think these are issues of trust that the Democrats are going to have to respond to when we go into this election cycle a year from now.
Do you have to campaign? Does your Republican candidates have to campaign beyond? Do you have to not look like you're rooting for failure? Do you have to campaign on a solution that you? I mean, one thing that the House Republicans haven't had is their own health care plan to run on. And I know Paul Ryan's coming up with one. Is that the idea that you'll rally around what Paul Ryan's writing for January?
Well, first of all, 2 things. One, you do have to talk about how you're going to solve problems, which is what we did in the Energy and Commerce Committee last week, looking at the website, trying to figure out how you waste $600 million. That's more than they wasted on Solyndra, and have a site that, you know, it doesn't work when they promised it would. And so we're going to get to the bottom of that, because, you know, whether you like Obamacare or not, as a taxpayer, I don't want us to waste $600 million on a site.
Let me ask you, do you want it to work? Do you want the president's health care law to succeed?
Hey, it's the law. I didn't vote for it. I don't like it. We had lots of alternatives, but remember, we were shut out of that process fully, a point that's often overlooked. We had 85 amendments to go to the House floor to put out our proposal, and Nancy Pelosi wouldn't let us have a single vote on a single amendment. You remember how they crammed this through in the dark of night. Nobody had a chance to read it or understand it, and that's That's why it's the mess it is today.
Do you want it to succeed? Do you want it to succeed?
I don't want it to fail. I don't want it to fail. I want to, you know, if it's the law, it's the law. I want it to be repealed and replaced. And if we get the opportunity and have the votes, we'll do that.
Let me talk about these primary challenges. You've got one. You've got a handful of incumbents. Is it automatic, by the way, that the NRCC backs all their incumbents, period?
Actually, it's automatic that we don't get involved in primaries, absent a Rule 11 letter from the RNC. So both parties have competitive primaries. If you're
not going to get involved in incumbent primaries, though?
We don't. We haven't. We don't spend money on them.
And you're not going to do that?
That's been, no. But the point here is that both parties have pretty challenging primaries. I mentioned the one in Gary Miller's seat on the Democratic side that's divided their party. Look at Mike McIntyre, North Carolina. You can go around the country. Both parties have primaries. They focus more on ours because I guess that's the story du jour.
Well, it's a pretty big story in your party, Congressman. The split inside your party. It's not a. Well, it's a pretty big. It's a bigger split right now than what's going on in the Democratic side. Nationally.
Well, but have you done a story on the one in Gary Miller's race? Have you looked at, you know, what's happening? Look at the party switcher with Evan Jenkins running against Nick Joe Rahal. He went from Democrat to Republican, and he is going to beat Nick Joe Rahal. And do you think the President of the United States will get a call from Nick Rahal to come into West Virginia?
You don't think he's going to campaign in West Virginia?
Do you think he's going to come in for Mike McIntyre? Will he come in for Jim Matheson? I don't think so. They've got to run against Barack Obama and the Obama administration they consistently vote against. And so I think they got a lot of explaining to do.
Let me ask you about that special election down in Florida, Tampa Bay, classic swing district. Political junkies like myself will probably overread the results because that's what we do. But how important is it? I mean, do you think it's one of those? If you lose it, then suddenly, you know what? You got to be more nervous about the national climate.
No, I think people read too much into special elections. Both parties have won and lost elections that a lot of prognosticators have said, oh, there goes the party this way or that way. And in the end, they're special elections. They're called special for a reason. But we want to win that seat. Florida is a very important state, and this is a very important district. And I think voters will want to continue the terrific work and legacy of Bill. We were talking as late as last night with some really terrific candidates that can come forward. Their candidate, Alice Sink, has to move in from another city to even run in this district. And, you know, she couldn't get elected governor. I think you're going to find that she's not compatible in this district, although she'll start with high name ID.
Do you want the congressman's widow to run?
You know, we're going to let Republicans pick who the best candidate is there. And look, Bill Young is a close friend, a personal counselor to me, a dear friend, and a great patriot and servant in America. And we'll see what plays out there.
Greg Walden, the NRCC chairman, Republican congressman from the state of Oregon. Thanks for coming on.
Good to be with you again. Thanks.